So let me introduce, we're talking today about cookies, chips, partitions, and post messages. We have Martin from Turnitin, Peter Franza from Harmonize, and Tim Cooper, who will kind of chime in from the WinEdTech side. And with that, I will hand it off.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I'll move off this image so that you don't have to stare at it for too much longer. You can thank Dolly 3 for that wondrous image of cookies and chips. All right. So what we're going to talk about today is kind of where we are currently with the cookie problem, what the cookie problem is, a bit of a recap on that. But then also where is that going in the future? So when we first started to tackle this issue, there wasn't really a robust solution from the browsers as a way to get around it. But as time's gone on, there's been some changes and some improvements on the browser side. So Peter is going to talk in the second half of this presentation around kind of what's going on there. So a little bit of a recap on what the cookie problem is, kind of why a lot of browsers and governments and everything like that are putting pressure on people to block cookies in certain instances. So the main reason that you get that pop-up on every website that you ever go on that says, are you okay with us having cookies, is due to tracking cookies. So they're used to track a user across the web. So a particular advertiser can see this is the same user using this website as using this other website, and they can link that traffic together and build up a picture of how, the types of sites that you're navigating to. Obviously, from a user privacy standpoint, that's not always great if they can deduce exactly what kinds of things you're looking at. So in a lot of cases, the way that these advertisers work is that they're embedded in an iframe inside every page that you're viewing. So the adverts that show on any website are embedded in these iframes, which are in essence just a window into a different website. So advertisers are using that, and inside those iframes, they're setting cookies to say, I want to track what you're doing. The problem there is that when browsers then attempt to tackle advertising cookies, they also impact us, right? So we're using iframes in a slightly different way. We're embedding tools, LTI tools, into LTI platforms, but we end up with the same kind of problem because we get treated as if we're an advertiser. So they go, you can't have access to cookies. But what we're using cookies for is slightly different. We're not too bothered necessarily about tracking the entire web history of a particular user. We just want to know that the user that's navigated from this page in my website to this other page in my website, or that's just completing an OpenID Connect login flow inside an iframe, is still the same user after they've clicked to the next page. So little sort of example of what that problem looks like with a bit of a diagram. So here we have our website. So this is the LTI platform, example.platform. Here we have the top level window. So that could be your instance of whatever platform, Blackboard, Canvas, D2L. And then usually your LTI tool is embedded in an iframe. So the first thing that happens is you're launching into the third-party login initiation URL of the tool. This will set a cookie. So it has a cookie. The cookie goes into the cookie storage for this particular domain of example.tool. Then we get redirected off that page back to the platform to say, okay, log me in. And you can see here, cookie's been stored. That page then launches back into the tool. This is where we get the ID token and we get the state to say, this was the state that you said you'd set in that initial request. So the reason that we're doing this is it prevents you from being able to force somebody into just playing the last part of this request. So I can't force somebody else to log in as me. Seems like a bit of a weird attack vector, but if whatever UI I'm being presented tells me to put in my card details, well, if I can log you into my account and then you go and put in all your card details, I can then go and use your card later on. Things like that. So here, right, we're coming back to the tool and we have a look at that box of cookies, but there's no cookies in it because the browser has said you're inside an iframe, you don't have access to cookies. So at this point, we say, well, the request isn't valid, right? We can't find your state. The state that you'd set in a cookie isn't there anymore. So about a year and a half ago, maybe a bit longer ago, we came up with a solution of how we could get around this, just without relying on anything from the browsers being implemented beyond what was already there. And the way that we did this was that rather than storing all of your state information in a cookie, because I don't have access to cookies here, instead, the platform itself would provide a space where you could say, store this bit of information for me. And the way that we would pass that information is using post messages. So as a tool, I can post message up to my parent and I can say, hey, platform, store this value for me. The good thing about post messages, it's all on the front end, right? Nothing's going via the browser. So this all stays, nothing's going via the backend server. It all stays within the browser, which means that you're not having to maintain a different state to pass it to a backend somewhere where you're changing you're kind of changing request, right, or changing the page that you're looking at. So here, our top level has now been sent this message from the tool, and it replies back to the tool to say, yes, I've stored that for you. Once, sorry, I'll go back to this one. Once the tool then finishes the launch, it can request back up to the platform and say, I want that data back, right? So in this case, during the OpenID connect request, I've stored my state in the platform's front end via post message. And then when I get the request to do a launch and I need to validate that state again, I can call back up to the platform and say, hey, was this this the state that I originally set? And this kind of took advantage of the URLs that are hard-coded into the registrations of LTI 1.3 configurations. So you have certain domains that you say for this registration, this is the domain of where the platform OIDC endpoints live. This is the domain of the tool. And because of that, what it allowed us to do is limit these post messages to specific domains. That way you couldn't have a sort of third party receive unsolicited post message information to say, oh, I'm going to intercept your state that way. So it was quite a lot of work for everyone on the working group to get to this point where we could make something like this. But it's been implemented by the majority of the big platforms and a number of tools. and it has solved our problem for the most part in those cases where it's been implemented. Obviously, one of the problems is that it still requires a fair bit of implementation. It also doesn't fix the fact that if your application, after it's done all of this, still requires cookies, well, you still don't have cookies, right? This is just getting you through the OpenID Connect request, which previously required you to have a cookie. So now it's been some time. Things have moved on a little. The browsers have made some updates, and I will pass you over to Peter, who will talk to you about some partition cookies.
Yeah, so partition cookies, I think we first got them in, I think Firefox introduced them maybe a year and change ago. And it's this idea that instead of sharing one large cookie jar, each site or each top level domain, and then under it each sub third party domain would get their own cookie storage. And so they've been slowly partitioning cookies, local storage, session storage, all these things to help minimize the amount of data that the ad trackers have access to. So they'll be able to see you, they'll be able to see you in one top level domain, but then when you go to another site, they don't know it's you. It looks like an entirely new person to them. They'll see that cookie as well, but they won't be able to correlate the two. Next slide. Yeah, so here's generally a description of the problem. I think this is similar to the way Martin explained it earlier. Here we have top level domains A and B, and you have nested embedded sites C. And so generally we've been sharing one jar, so you can see it's pretty easy to see. If I put cookie C while I'm in site A, I can still see cookie C when I'm on site B. Next. All right, and then when we're partitioning, you see that each top level domain gets their own jar now. So A and C is a jar, B and C is a jar, and site C can't correlate from one site to the next. Next. All right, so for us, this is a problem because that's how we were doing the tracking for the OIDC flow. And more generally, if your web app is not a very specifically architected to not use cookies, like maybe an SPA, you might still need the cookies later. So some of the things that you can do, you can always frame bust your way out. That's a little icky because now you're not in the iframe anymore, and it's a bit of friction for users. You can re-architect and become cookieless. It's a very modern way to do it, but it's hard and lots of work if you have a legacy app. Or the third way is to deal with chips. So chips is just the P in chips is for partition. So it's cookies having independently partitioned states, chips, if you want to work, if you like backronyms. So it will work. And in a lot of cases, it'll be okay if you do it just fine. But as we'll go through, I'll go through some of the idiosyncratic behavior of it, just so you know. Next. All right. So because it can never be that easy, here is the main state of the world. So Safari does not do partitioning. They have just said no to third-party cookies unless you have got a grant for the storage access API, and I'll talk more about that in a few slides. Firefox will just automatically partition the cookies the way that I described in the previous slide, where the cookies just aren't shared across sites. If you need access to your top level cookie, like if you're moving from where your app is sometimes a top level domain and sometimes an embedded one, you'll have to also get a storage access request from the access API. And then the other thing to know about Firefox is that if you want to propagate a cookie store forward from an embedded store out to a top level frame, you'll have to decorate your links with either rel equals opener or use window.open for those propagations. Firefox started assuming rel equals no opener by default. So if you're unspecified, it doesn't put an opener or a refer on those links, and nor will it propagate any of these stores with it. So that's how that is. And then for Chrome, the big one, in order to use the partition cookies, you have to go add this partitioned keyword onto the cookie. The same way I think in 2020 we had to add same site equals none and HTTP only and secure in order to get a cookie at all in a third-party context. Just go into the code you wrote back in 2020 and add a new word partitioned, and that will tell Chrome that it is okay to partition a cookie. So whereas Firefox is just doing it by default, Chrome requires the app itself to declare that it wants that to be done. Additionally, if you haven't done that, Chrome has also just very recently started supporting access to your cookie store via the Storage Access API. Next slide, please. All right, so Safari, they started doing their thing in Safari 11, so it's been a while now. Firefox, Safari 69, so that was, I don't know, a year or so ago. Chrome, they started their support for their cookie solution in 1.14, so that was only toward the end of last year. But starting on January 4th of this year, they're doing a 1% global trial rollout. So, if your support requests have gone up by 1% on, hey, where did my cookies go? This is probably why. And that they plan to have a full rollout of it in place by the end of 2024.
And then if none of your support can replicate it on
Right.
their version of Chrome, it's because they're not in that 1%.
Right. You can enroll in it by, if you look it up, there's like a way to go in and opt your browser settings in to the trial. But yeah, just be aware of those things. Next slide. All right. I'll talk a little bit about the Storage Access API because I think it's something that has eluded people. Next. All right, so I know it's code, it's a little gross, but there's a couple key things in here that I want to point out. So A, this is it. That's all there is. The first thing is in the very first line, these requests must originate from a user action. So we can't just do it for them automatically. They have to click a button in your page that says that they want to request it. And then it'll go through a bunch of these lines. So it'll check if they have access already, in which case you could just go forth and start pulling the data out of the cookie, or it'll request access, and I'll show you what that looks like on the next slide in a minute. And then they'll request it, and the browser will either give it to them or it won't, based on the feedback the user gives the browser. So not a ton of code. So like I said, to get all of this working across all the browsers, it was for Chrome, go in and add the word partitioned on the cookie itself, the same place you're putting the same site equals none. And then for Safari and sometimes Firefox, and then in rarer cases, Chrome, do this. And that should get you cookies across all of your browsers as most often as you can get them. And then in the cases here where you just can't have them, you're being denied, it seems like your only recourse is to frame bust. Next slide.
Or use the
Sure.
existing storage mechanisms that they have, but obviously they're not quite the same.
Right.
Actually, bit of clarification on this, Peter, that you may know. When you're requesting storage access, is it per top level domain or per subdomain?
For for Chrome, it is per sub. I think for Safari, it's per. No, I think it's always per sub. I think it's always per sub.
Okay. So yeah, so that's something to be aware of. If bits of your application are on different domains, you're potentially having to ask for this multiple times.
Next slide. And then these are just examples. I'm sure we've all seen when the browser has been asking us more recently, there's been an escalation of things it'll ask us to approve. So this is just no different. So when you make that request, it's going to pop up one of these things that's entirely managed by the browser itself to say, hey, this site wants to approve access to give third-party access to a partition store, yada, yada, yada. Can I? And so, they click allow or they click block, and then, we move on. The authorizations for Safari, the storage authorization is good for about a week. And then in Firefox and Chrome, they're good for around a month. So, periodically the stores time out and the users have to reauthorize. But you can have cookies still.
All right, and then I believe last bit is Q&A. So we'll open the floor to questions if anybody wants any clarification on things or just has general questions. I do have some more slides with a bit more detailed information about our current cookieless flow if anybody has questions on that as well.
We did have one question in chat from Xander. Is the storage access required to use partition cookies in non-Safari browsers?
No. No. So that's what I was saying. Like Firefox will just partition the cookies. You don't have to do anything. And as long as your use cases are relatively simple and you don't require access to a top level store as an embedded application, it will always just do the right thing. When you need to access, you have to request it when you want to do things more complicated than that, where it's like, hey, I was previously a top level store, but now I'm embedded, but I really want that data that I used to have up at the top level down here in the embeds, then you have to request to get to that information. And then for Chrome, if you're just going to put the partitioned flag on, it's always going to just give you the partition store. And then it's kind of the same thing. Like if you request access to the storage bucket, what you're really requesting is access to your first party bucket.
Cool, great. Yeah, so the storage access is only for breaking out of the partition.
Correct.
Sweet. That's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm.
And I'm guessing you could, if you're in a partitioned space and I don't know, you're clicking on a button that opens, like in our case, right, our viewer opens in a new window, but the rest of the application stays in the iframe. Technically, the viewer wouldn't have cookies that the frame had. So
right,
I could call opener and say, hey, opener, what were your cookies?
Right. So and that's what if you propagate the link when you go to that top level frame with rel equals opener, at least in Firefox, that will automatically move your cookie store from the partition. It'll promote it from a partition store to a top level store. Like it'll follow that link click if
Right.
you use opener or window to open it. But yeah, if you don't, then you'll have to go back and ask the opener, hey, what was that session ID or whatever. But if you didn't put rel equals opener, you won't be able to get back. So it's really becomes very important to decorate with rel opener, especially for
And
anything.
that's only Firefox for that one.
Yes.
In Chrome, does that automatically promote, or does it not promote at all?
Does not promote at all.
Okay. So in reality, you would still have to
Go back and
have
ask.
some kind
Yes.
of fallback to either go back and ask or request the storage access.
Yep.
All right.
Any other questions on the cookie solution or cookies in general before we end the recording and open up to general Q&A and conversation for a regular member community day?
The only thing I'd add to this is that even though the changes are, have been very clearly outlined by Martin Peter in terms of the browsers, there's another layer which also gets involved, which is if you're using libraries for managing your cookies and stuff, a lot of them have not yet been updated to understand the about to use the partition keyword, for example. Something as simple as that may require you to do it more directly than through that additional layer that some people use. So I'll just call that out as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hacking a Perl library to include extra bits on a cookie turned out to be quite interesting the last time we had to add same site to it. So
Yeah, and one other even more complicated thing that you won't be able to control, like we use AWS, and AWS has not yet added the partition keyword to their ALB load balancer cookies. So the load balancer cookie does not get propagated into the iframe, and so we always see people like bouncing nodes all the time. And we asked them, and they said they plan to do it sometime this year, but they haven't done it yet. So, good luck.
So to paraphrase, and I'm not trying to put words into anybody's mouth. So see if you see differently, let me know. But although there's changes happening in partition cookies, chips, the post message solution that we have already is still alive and kicking, and eliminates a lot of these. You don't have these challenges with that if you choose to use post message solution.
your application is designed to
Right.
work without cookies.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Anyone's considering which way they should go, as of today, the post message solution does not have these challenges. Whereas you may be tempted by the fact that there are partition cookies coming through, and even today they don't provide a smoother path forward than the post message solution at this stage.
Yeah.
Well, if they do, they do provide cookie support.
Yes. Yeah.
Which is what is basically, saying. But also, you could use the storage to store something else than just your IDC flow. You can extend your usage of the storage to store application data, across frame navigation if you wanted to, right? Nothing forbids you to store something else. But it's very different from cookies, very different from cookie. Still allows you to store somewhere, some state in the browsers that you can get back.
Yeah, because it's not passing that state automatically to every request that's being sent. Whereas you have a cookie, that cookie gets sent on every request. Whereas if you have something stored in the platform's front end via the cookieless flow that we have, then you have to request that, and then you would have to make another request to your backend with that either quick cookie equivalent that you've found. So yeah, what I would say is especially if you're a tool with fairly limited scope at the moment, and you know that the platforms that you're working with implement the cookieless flow, and you're a single page app, then it's definitely worth doing. There's some code there that on the One EdTech GitHub, which explains how to do the post message back and forth, and it's basically drag and drop to add it in. But yeah, hopefully down the line, as these things improve and the browsers get a little bit more consistent, we'll be able to sort of phase out having to do custom, a kind of custom cookie store in a sense.
Okay, I have a question. So let's say the platform such as Canvas, they are using the Windows parent post message strategy. So as a tool, do we have to use the same strategy or we can use a different strategy?
So you can all of the partition cookies and chips and all of that. You can use that regardless of what the platform does as a tool. The platform's not going to stop you from being able to access these things. The cookieless post message flow requires the platform to have implemented that. So if you support it and the platform supports it, then you can use that. But all of these other options are available no matter what.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on cookies specifically before we wrap up and switch over to our general community day conversation? Okay.
I'm just going to go back so that we can all admire this picture again for a little bit.
And yes, we'll make the deck available, as well as the recording of this will be available after this. So thank you once again to Martin, Peter, and Tim for talking us through cookies, chips, partitions, and post messages, and for this unsettling image that we'll never forget. And I'm going to stop the recording now.